Here's the question we're going to focus on. Explain why there was an increase in poverty in Elizabethan England. Now this is a typical explain question, and the format of the question is very standard. It will start with the root explain why, and then you're going to have the topic that you're going to be asked to focus on. Then you'll be given two pieces of optional stimulus material. An identical question is going to come up in paper 1 and in paper 3 as well. So all of the techniques that we use in the presentation here are entirely transferable to those questions as well. Before we have a go at our question, let's quickly recap the topic. We're going to look at some of the causes of the increase in poverty in Elizabethan England, and we'll also focus on the consequences of those causes. So firstly, population rose dramatically. It went up from 3 million to 4.2 million by the end of the reign. And this led to higher food prices and lower wages. Those are two consequences that really affected the poor people the worst. There were also repeated harvest failures. These happened in the 1570s and in the 1590s. They resulted in higher food prices and malnutrition. Again, these are two consequences that really affected poorer people the worst. A third problem was enclosure. This is where farmers switched production away from growing vegetables to rearing sheep. This caused the loss of common land, as farmland was often enclosed or fenced in, and also caused unemployment, because far fewer workers were needed on these farms. It was also linked to food shortages, because the sheep that were reared for their wool rather than their meat. Rents also rose dramatically in this period, and simply farmers passed these on in the form of increased prices for the food and crops that were grown on their land. A major trade in the Elizabethan period was the cloth trade. This did badly in the period. Partly this was linked to overproduction. There was too much cloth produced, and so the price of it went down. Businesses failed, so this led to unemployment across the cloth industry, with people in towns in particular being badly affected. Such jobs as weavers and dyers, those were used in the production and finishing of cloth, were badly affected, and also the merchants that bought and sold the cloth did badly too. A problem at the start of the reign was debasement. The quality of coins in circulation was bad, and this had been the case since the time of Henry VIII. Now this led to inflation because people needed more coins to make up the same amount of silver, and this made prices rise, and again this particularly affected the poor people. But it is worth remembering that this is a problem that Elizabeth really came to terms with, and it was soon dealt with by some very careful economic planning, where the coins were reminted at a higher quality. So she dealt with this one quite quickly, so we can only really use it for questions that address the start of Elizabeth's reign. Another longer term problem was the closure of the monasteries. Now these had been shut a good 20 years before Elizabeth's reign by Henry VIII. But it meant that when hard times did come, that a potential source of support wasn't available to people. And so the effects of poverty were felt worse. So let's return to our question. What we're going to need to come up with are 3 well-structured P paragraphs. Point, evidence, and then explanation or elaboration depending on how you've been taught. Our paragraphs do need to be entirely relevant to the topic of the question. If there are dates in the question, they also need to limit their material to within those dates, otherwise we won't get credit for the things that we discuss. We're also going to have to introduce a paragraph of our own. We can talk about the cloth trade, and we can talk about enclosure, but it's absolutely vital that we also produce a paragraph that comes from our own knowledge. It's really worth remembering in these questions too, there's no need for an introduction. There's no need for a conclusion. We can get straight on with our paragraphs. If we do write an introduction or a conclusion, it's not a problem. We're not going to lose marks, but we're wasting time because we won't be picking any marks up for them. So let's look at a similar question that was in the 2018 paper 2. Explain why there was an increase in exploration in the years 1558 to 1588. You may use the following in your answer: navigational aids and luxury goods. So here's a section of one student's response. You might like to pause the presentation in a moment while you read through, but as you do, try to keep an eye out for the different phases and features that you'll find in the paragraph. Look for the point at the start, and then the evidence phase, and then finally the explanation or elaboration phase. And also try to look for the connective phrase that the student uses to lead herself from evidence to explanation. Okay, let's see how you got on. The connective phrase is "this meant that," and then that leads us into the blue section where our student explains and elaborates on the evidence that she'd previously introduced. It's worth us just pausing on connective phrases just for a moment or so. The student in that question used them repeatedly. You can use any from this list that you can see on the left there, either "this meant that," or "as a result of this," or "this was important because," or "the consequence of this was," or "this mattered because." These are all valid phrases that you can use, all as good as the other. You can use the same one repeatedly. Indeed, our student here, and this is a full marks answer, repeatedly just used the phrase "this" or "which meant that" to lead herself into the explanation phase of her paragraphs. Okay, let's return to our original question, explaining why there was an increase in poverty in Elizabethan England. We're about to have a look at a model paragraph. As you read through it, try to spot those different phases that we've previously mentioned. The main point, evidence, and then explanation or elaboration. You might like to pause the presentation just for a moment here while you read through and try to find them. Okay, let's see how you got on. What's quite noticeable here is that our student has used several connective phrases to sustain and to build her explanation phase. And this is quite a useful technique. It means that you can really present the whole range of your knowledge and use it effectively to pick up points for sustaining your explanation, or simply leading it into a different direction if you run out of things to say on one point. Okay, let's just quickly return to our content to see what we've remembered. You might like to pause the presentation again here and see how much of the table you can complete from memory. And let's see how you got on. Here's a complete table. Again, you might like just to pause it for a moment or so and just complete any gaps that you need. So just before we finish, do remember that that P technique that we've just discussed is entirely transferable to question 4 in paper 1 and question 2 in paper 3. Here are 2 examples of questions from the 2018 examination papers. And I hope you can notice that the phrasing of those questions is entirely the same as the questions we've been looking at on Elizabethan history. So finally, you might want to take this a little bit further. If you do, here are 3 ideas of activities that you could try. You might firstly want to write your own P paragraph on the causes of the increase of poverty in Elizabethan England. Or you might like to return to the alternative question we were looking at on exploration and write your own P paragraph on the causes of the increase of exploration. Or you might want to build your knowledge and understanding. Maybe now move on to revise how Elizabethans reacted to the problem of increased poverty. Okay, thanks for watching. Good luck with your revision. You'll find some other presentations on our CHSG History channel for you to work on your exam technique and also for your knowledge and understanding as well.